Hello, hello, hello. I am Axel Cannon, and this is Stupid Game Experiments. My current stupid experiment is building the same game in three of the most popular game engines: Unity, Unreal, and Godot. The game is called SH++, and it's a cross between N++ and Asteroid. If you've been watching previous videos in this series, then you'll know that I'm currently in a bit of a story arc with Godot developers. And if you haven't watched the previous videos in this series, then you should probably subscribe right now so that you don't miss out on any more episodes. But I'll take pity on you for now and catch you up on the plot. The inciting incident started 2 weeks ago when I put out a video where I compared the main programming languages of Unity, Unreal, and Godot. In that video, I said that Godot didn't use static typing, and that without static typing, there are a lot of errors that wouldn't be caught during compile time. Godot developers promptly gathered their flaming arrows and war catapults and informed me that yes, GDScript does have static typing, you moron. So, always being willing to admit my mistakes, I took the opportunity in a video the following week to make a correction. I acknowledged that GDScript does in fact have static typing. However, I pointed out there are still some limitations that made it concerning. I'll cover those limitations in detail later, but the two that are relevant to this part of the story are that enums aren't a type in GDScript, and structs don't even exist. In the comments of that video, Ignacus said that he uses scripts of type resource as a struct. Ignacus is kind of an unsung hero in this little saga. He keeps showing up in the comments of my videos, subtly nudging me in the side, pointing out the things that I got wrong or missed. He has his own channel here on YouTube with some great tutorials on Godot, and since he clearly knows more than I do on the subject, you should definitely go check him out. And actually, he's one of several unsung heroes on this channel. So let me digress for a moment and thank everyone that takes the time to give me useful info in the comments. My channel is still small enough that I do take the time to read all the comments, even though lately I've been failing miserably in replying to them all. Your comments have really helped me improve the direction of this ongoing project, and I really appreciate you taking the time to contribute to the progress. Okay, back to the main storyline. I went and took a look at resources in Godot and found this line in the documentation. Resources in Godot are like scriptable objects in Unity. At the moment I read that, time stopped, the clouds parted, and a ray of pure grace shined down on me. You see, a couple of weeks ago, I watched 2 Unity talks where they recommend using scriptable objects as enums. If you combine that with Ignacus recommending using them for structs, I had the inspiration that resources were going to solve all the problems I had with Godot. This was going to be Godot's redemption arc, rising from the ashes of my criticism to claim its place among the truly great game engines. And then it all came crashing down on my head. I did a massive dive into Godot last week, anticipating putting out a video about all these great solutions for getting the most out of Godot. What I found instead was one roadblock in my way after another. So instead, this video is going to cover all the limitations I found with Godot and why I think this severely limits its use as a game engine. I'm actually really sad to be making this video. I have a deep-seated appreciation for open source software, and I will always give it the benefit of the doubt over any kind of proprietary alternative. I don't expect open source software to compete with heavily funded proprietary software for features. So I don't really care if Godot doesn't have the shiny features of Unreal and Unity, like latest gen visual orgasm generators, or, like being able to easily port to consoles. You don't buy a machete and then get mad when it doesn't cut your lawn as fast as you're riding lawnmower. However, if the machete does a bad job at its intended purpose, namely killing zombies, that is something worth complaining about. So that's what I'm going to do in this video. Complain about Godot doing a bad job of killing zombies while I dodge flaming arrows. Because this story has apparently evolved into the plot of Pride and Prejudice and zombies or something, I don't know. Anyway, getting back to Godot, let me briefly recap my original complaints about using typecasting in Godot. Number 1, enums are not a type. Number 2, there are no structs. Number 3, arrays cannot be typecast. And number 4, you can only export built-in and native types. Exporting in Godot is what allows variables to be changeable in the editor. Extending the resource class could, theoretically, solve the first 3 of these. Creating a resource to hold variables makes a fine replacement for a struct and has the added benefit of being able to add validation or other code if needed. You can also create instances of your new resource class and save these as files. These instances can then be used like enums, which is what the Unity talks suggested for scriptable objects. Finally, in order to get typecast arrays, you could simply create a resource that wraps an array and add functionality to ensure that only items of the correct type get added. This still doesn't solve the limitation of exporting only built-in and native types. However, I came up with a solution for that as well. All three engines allow you to create plugins that add custom functionality to the editor. So I figured I'd just write a custom plugin to handle adding my custom resources to the editor. It would be a little extra work, but this is what I expect and what I like about open source software. It may not always work the way you want out of the box, but you always have the freedom to MacGyver it into doing what you need it to do. And of course, the first MacGyver here, the reboot, was an atrocity. Unfortunately, as it turned out, Godot has some serious constraints on what tinkering you are actually capable of doing. Here are all the problems I ran into. First, resources can't reference an instance of themselves. It causes a cyclic load error. To use the resources like enums, I wanted to list the options as constants with references to their saved instances. This, however, caused cyclic load errors that would result in the resource not being loaded. There's also a bug where this error actually breaks every other file that references that resource type. What happens is that when it fails to load the resource due to the cyclic load error, every script that references that resource gets a fail to load error. However, when you remove the offending code, it doesn't fix any of the scripts referencing the resource, so they still register as an error. Instead, you have to change the class name of the resource, save it, change it back to the original name, and save it again. And this updates all the references. However, it took me like 2 hours to figure this out after constantly trying to figure out how to fix bugs that no longer existed. My first attempt to solve this cyclic load error was to just create the enum as a subclass and then put the constants in the top class. Of course, in what is going to become a running theme in this video, you can't create instances in the editor of subclasses that extend resources, only top-level classes that extend resources. My next attempted solution was to divide my pseudo enum into two classes, one containing the enum code and the other containing the references. This solution is kind of gross, but the code does run, so it's at least better than everything else I had tried. Also, at this point I found out that static functions in Godot can't reference any of the variables of the class. Not even constants, which by definition won't change. In fact, trying to reference those constants from within the static function once again causes the aforementioned cyclic load errors. So once again, I had to split my code, this time duplicating it instead of creating a new file in order to get around this cyclic load error. There is sort of a workaround for this that isn't great either. You can autoload scripts, and that autoloaded instance kind of works like a static class. The first problem with this is that you have to extend node rather than resource, because an autoloaded class is basically just a node that gets loaded at the beginning of every level. This, of course, being another problem with using autoloading files for this use case, in that the file will get loaded for every scene in your game, even if you only need it for a single scene. At this point, I still didn't have a solution that I liked, but I decided to switch over to trying to customize the editor. I managed to get a basic plugin working and get a basic idea of how properties were added and edited. I even made a custom control scene for my custom enum class. And here's where things really started to go off the rails for me. The fact that you can't export custom types to the editor is actually only the beginning. For some reason, the editor reads every file as being empty unless it is topped with the keyword tool. Sort of. I don't really understand how it works, because if you check if a function exists with has method, it will return true. But then if you try to call that function, it will say it doesn't exist. So sometimes it knows what's in a file and sometimes it doesn't. Now, having thought about this a little bit more, adding the tool keyword to every file seems like maybe that's not a great idea. But previous me, just trying to get things to work, went and added the tool keyword to the resource file I was trying to reference. Only when I did this, it immediately broke all of the instances of that class that I had created. I don't know what exactly the problem is, but as soon as I removed the tool keyword, they all worked again. This was essentially the end of the road for me. What is the point of being able to customize the editor if you can't access any of the information from your custom classes that you might want to show in the editor? I mean, I'm not saying there is no use for it, but seriously, this is like trying to sell someone a cardboard cutout of a Ferrari while insisting it's a real car. Now, if you're just getting started with game development, none of this probably matters to you. While I wouldn't say this is really advanced material, you can build a game in Godot without ever going down any of the rabbit holes I went down here. And since none of this will really affect beginner developers, I'd still say Godot is probably the most beginner-friendly of the 3 game engines. What this does change, for me at least, is how far I think you can ultimately go with Godot as a game engine. I'm going to talk about that more in an upcoming video I'm planning, comparing the mindsets behind the 3 game engines. I'm also working on a video comparing data objects in all 3 game engines, and in that video I'll cover resources in Godot in more detail. So if either of those sound interesting to you, or you just want to hear more stories in my adventures with all 3 game engines, make sure you take this opportunity to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. If you're a Godot developer and want to send some flaming arrows my way, my comment section is always open, and pointing out any errors I made is always appreciated. Finally, if you found this video informative, take a moment to hit that like button as well. It helps me obviously, but it also feeds the algorithm and helps your fellow game developers find this content as well. That's it for this video. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.